Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world. This is part 2 of this episode. Be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already. Link in the description.
This episode is brought to you by Founder Catalyst. If you're raising funds and you need to get yourself SEIS and EIS advanced assurance and you need some help with that, then stick around to find out how you can get 5% off of Founder Catalyst's services. Okay, we're back for part 2. I'm here with Joseph and from SFC Capital. And if you haven't watched part 1, I highly recommend you do. Joseph obviously introduces himself, tells us a bit about his story, how he got involved with SFC and so on. And we talked about a whole range of topics. So go and watch that before you carry on watching this, or don't. I'm not your boss. Do what you want. But, still, I would recommend it. But yeah, we're just going to continue straight in. So we were just talking about, you were just mentioning about how you personally prefer to evaluate startups and a bit about the process. But sort of more broadly speaking, I'm interested to know, like SFC, as an organization, do you have some sort of main guiding principles of what you desperately want to see or must see in order to make, maybe without really revealing too much of the secret sauce, because I'm sure some of it you want to play close to your chest, but what can you reveal? What would you say are kind of non-negotiables, maybe?
Yeah. So, just as a reminder, if you have the first part, we invest on very, very first round. So, where you could typically pre-seed investments. And we're sector agnostic. So we invest in companies that develop new types of drugs, all the way to companies that are selling, consumer products. So how do you build a process that allow you to select companies at such an early stage, where usually there isn't like tons of data to look at, and across such different fields as well. So that's something we've learned, by doing again. So when you've got 10 years of experience, it gets a little bit easier to sort of formulate your strategy a little bit more. And I think what we've come to now is a system where we've actually celebrated a 500th investment this month in February. So we've got quite a lot of data on how companies.
That's awesome.
Thank you. How companies go wrong, how startups, where startups go wrong, basically. Whenever obviously you invest at this stage, you're going to have failures. So we've invested in 500 companies. We're mostly getting close to 100 failures. So about 15 to 20% failure rates, which is what you expect. And actually, whenever we have a failure, we try and learn from it. What were the things that could have, we could have flagged quite early on with, the business, the team, things that led to, the company not working out. And sometimes it's not so easy to point one reason. And sometimes it's just, bad luck. But sometimes there were, issues from the get-go that we kind of knew about, or we could have known about if we asked the right questions. Or maybe chose to ignore, because you get quite excited about what the company does or the profile of the main founder, and you choose to ignore, issues within the business. And they actually end up being issues within the team quite often. So, the way the founders got together was, a bit artificial. Maybe they didn't know each other that well, hadn't worked together before, the way the equity was split, the way the incentives were set from the get-go between the founders. A lot of things like that can lead to, misalignments or disputes. And it's quite tough for a company in the early years to recover from disagreements or misalignment between founders. You kind of have to have a very smooth dynamic between them. That's kind of a given. So I would say a lot of our selection, the way we select companies now, is about trying to identify those red flags rather than having a lot more sort of a positive approach. We try and connect with the best accelerators, universities, the best kind of sources of deal flow. But then when we look at something that looks interesting on the face of it, then it's about drilling down and asking a lot of questions. That can be quite personal questions, the founder's personal circumstances, how the team got together, why they chose this particular problem, and then quite personal, questions on their personal situations, financial situation, to really kind of understand, are you at the stage of your life you're ready for the start of the journey. Because founders typically underestimate how tough it's going to be, how long it's going to take. So it's trying to identify the resilience of the team and potential weak points that maybe can be worked around, or maybe actually reasons to not invest.
And you guys work with ETA technologies to help with some part of this. Can you explain a bit more about that? Because obviously I know them quite well, because I know the founder and we've had him on the show, and also we've partnered with them actually, so which we've talked about before. But for those that don't know, maybe you could explain a bit more about that.
Yeah, exactly. So part of what we do is obviously we've always done some psychometric analysis of the team. We started with very, very basic tests to kind of make sure that there was different personality types within the company, and working with ETA, that's sort of next level to that. That's really going deep into not only just the personality types of the founders, making sure they're complementary, but also the what I just said, the incentives of each founder, the timeline of each founder, quite important. The approach to their work. And the decision, look at decisions are taken, all these things. Are you looking at a team that quite often, for example, the typical issue that we uncover with the reports, the ETA report would be, this is a very, very product-centric team where everyone in the team quite likes working on building features, developing solutions to a problem, etc. Very little on the commercial side. No one quite likes going out there and, basically getting no's and talking to customers in a way that pushing the product really. That's your typical red flag, and not an easy one to address actually.
I've relied most of my recent career on those founders by by being the commercial advisor or fractional CCO, right?
Exactly, and it can be that you point out to them that there is this gap in the team. And they sometimes come back and with solutions around that, or sometimes you have to be careful not to see the potential of one of the founders to grow into a role and develop something that they maybe didn't have at the beginning. So you have to be a bit careful and not take that completely at face value. Picture day zero, but it doesn't tell you necessarily how people will change and adapt, but it gives you at least the opportunity to challenge the founders on certain things and test, how they, their ability to self-reflect and identify their own weaknesses and see, how they plan to address them. And sometimes you get people who are very defensive. Obviously, that's not the right approach. But quite often you deal with people who they're aware of the certain limitations, and they have good ideas of how to work around those, and maybe that the people that we bring to the company, they're quite clear on what they need, but it can be their own personal development that they fully intend to go through as well. So a lot of investors will tell you, we, especially early stage investors, we invest in people, so other people, but that doesn't really mean anything. It's everyone will say that, of course. And it's very easy to say that someone has the right experience and is smart, right? Easy to assess that. What's a lot more difficult is to identify those other points. Do they have the right mix of personality types in the team? Do they have the right ways to come to decisions? Do they have the right focus on product sales, fundraising, etc.? And that takes a lot more digging. And frankly, we've learned it from getting it wrong many times. Tools like ETA report, that helps massively.
Right.
The experience of investing in teams that end up failing and kind of understanding why and applying those lessons the next time, that's hugely valuable.
Well, and something where Soma, the founder of and CEO of ETA, and I really align on, and in fact we've had this conversation a couple of times with other investors on the show too, is that traditionally, really in this space, those sort of that level of valuation has really been down to gut instincts up until now, and still is the case for a lot of investors, either individually or in firms and so on. And that's kind of crazy when you think about it, because with your background in investment banking, you'll know that data is king. And so to make any kind of, I mean, it's really the only remaining asset class in the world that is so absent of data when it comes to these kinds of things, and even to this day. And that's kind of crazy considering the scale of that of venture as an asset class, that we're still making these decisions based on largely gut feeling and things like pitch decks and and things like that, like we were mentioning in part one. It's kind of it's a fairly immature way of approaching a pretty mature asset class, really. I mean, look, overall as an asset class, it's still relatively young, but in the grand scheme of things, but it is, you could argue it's in its teenage years, it's in young adulthood. We should be applying some slightly higher levels of scrutiny to these things and standardization. And I think quantifying, as you are, these data points around skill sets, personality types, and team dynamics and stuff is a really important starting point. Really.
Yeah, exactly. And the ETA report is super useful for that. It gives us, a more analytical way of looking at certain things. And then we feed that we've got our own kind of scoring system where we put a lot of these things, and some of the scores are very obvious and everyone would have them. Market size, the exit potential, the level of co-investment, things like that, obviously boosting your score. And anyone would include those. So there's things that we've included in the score that maybe not so obvious. Things like the way the equity is split between the founders, the way the way founders are thinking about salaries. Things that can be quite difficult conversations as well. But and it's not so much necessarily about we're not looking for a particular outcome necessarily, but we are always interested in how founders respond to these things. And we want to see. I'll give you an example. We're looking at a company right now where the founders, we obviously ask how the money will be spent, and a lot of the funding round was going into the salaries of the two co-founders. And we, as always, ask the question, challenge that a little bit. You've got a lot of money to spend on other things as well. You want to make those hires. Can we look, the company is pre-revenue or very early revenue? Can we, build a different structure on, can we look at that? And, you either have people who straight away get it, that you're coming from the perspective, how can we make sure the company is in the best position and you have maximum runway to last and learn and raise your next round, whatever it is that you need to do in a year or two. That's what the attitude you expect. And it might be that we keep that same outcome. But the reaction that you deal with sometimes is a very defensive reaction. Or, well, we have these degrees, we have this experience, this is our market rate, this is actually below our market rate. And it's just like, well, we're not your employer.
Right. They're approaching it more like a salary negotiation,
yeah,
a job
exactly,
interview.
Exactly. And that's not at all what it is. We are about to be partners in your business. We're not going to run the company. You will be running the company. We're not going to tell you how to spend the money on a day-to-day basis, but what we look for is actually to test exactly how is this a job for you, or is this building a company? Because if this is a job, this is probably not the right mindset, especially at this stage. Maybe in 5 to 10 years, it becomes a bit more of a job. And you can have those conversations, of course, maybe sooner than that, But, the first one, your company is a pre-revenue stage, company basically doesn't exist. It's we're building a baby, so we don't want to take milk out of the baby's mouth. So it's really it's quite extreme, but in a way that's how you want people to think. In a way, we're not at all like we know that you will get much higher salary in any other in a regular job. This is not
security is earned. It isn't just given, right? You need to work towards building that security. And
yeah, exactly. We want to see someone, people who are excited about building the business, excited about building the value of their equity in the business. This is what it's all about. So,
hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
It's very uncomfortable. It can be very uncomfortable conversations sometimes. We have to have them. I think it's very healthy to have them, and I think it's very healthy for the founders to have them between them. And sometimes we raise those issues, and you realize that they haven't really talked to each other about that at all. And that's not good. You really need to have those honest conversations between the founders first before you even talk to investors. And all these things we try and get a feeling for, actually a bit more than a feeling, and get to a certain outcome, and we'll try and put a score on it. It's not perfect, but at least we feel like we come to a standardized way of looking at every investment decision that we make, taking into account those these real people issues, because that's what it's all about at this stage, really. Because you can get very excited about the market, the market opportunity, but really that will change quite a bit. You're making an investment 5-10 years with a 5-10 year timeline. The market will completely change. The business will change its focus 10 times. So you're actually betting on the ability of founders to execute.
Right, that's what it comes down to at the end of the day: execution and the ability to move with the various challenges and changes that inevitably come as well. So the ability we use the word pivot a lot, but not necessarily entirely pivot, just roll with the punches, basically, ride the waves.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. The original concept is never the concept you'll be running 2 years down the line. Never. And if we look at the successes in our portfolio, the Onfidos, the Cognizants, the original idea was very different to what they do today. Very, very, very rarely do they do the same thing they set out to do. It's a little bit different, obviously, with life science companies. But life science companies, you look for other things. So basically, again, we've learned that from experience, getting it wrong many times. But the challenge with life science companies is more, you usually deal with academic founders quite often, university spin-outs. So the challenge is more, what the cap table looks like and what the team actually driving the company looks like, and sometimes the mismatch between the two. And also, so typically you have, whoever invented the technology has a massive stake in the company, even though they're not planning to spend any time on it. That's probably a need to address early on. Or the university is taking a huge chunk.
Of course, because there's a lot of well, I wouldn't say, I'm not sure if they're laws necessarily, but there's a lot of regulations to some degree where, if the technology is being created within a university, they automatically get a huge stake in that and things like that, right? I don't claim to know that space particularly well, but there's some very interesting dynamics there that don't apply in other fields, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's very specific to this world, and it varies from university to university, probably university department to university department. So it's very, very. But we've learned to address those things, and actually they're not easy, but usually there's not much questions on the IP. The actual technology is usually comes to us very developed, lots of validation. They've won huge grants. They've won, they've got pilots with big pharma companies. So there's clearly something there on the tech side. There's clinical trials that prove that the tech works. There's lots to get excited about the technology, but the issues is more on the people side usually. Who's actually going to drive the company? And that can be a real challenge sometimes.
And other skill sets there to do it at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the people who led the R&D phase are the right people to then lead the next phase. Would they actually need to get to the next phase, or could they get acquired before? So there's different, but that's quite specific to them. We still send them the same question. We're still interested in thinking. You obviously get very different types of response from those teams, but it's still interesting to see how they think about their time commitment to the business, their skin in the game, and things like that.
So
there's a basic level. Business is business at the end of the day. Whether you're developing a drug or selling shampoo, there's fundamentals that you need to get right, or the company will not survive.
Yeah, those fundamentals always apply to any kind of business, right? But so I get the sense then really what you're doing is, if I've understood you correctly, is while you've got these quite specific questions, it's not just about the specific answers to those questions, although there's some element to that, but it's more about revealing the way that they think and the way that they actually address those answers that is probably the most revealing aspect of it, right?
Yes. Yeah, and it's really asking relatively uncomfortable questions. Not uncomfortable is not the right word, but quite personal questions. And
quite
I'm
probing.
always surprised. Yeah, exactly. It's challenging them on how, the equity is, you've got two co-founders, the equity is 55-45. Why is that? Why is it not 50-50? It's just getting to the bottom of it sometimes. It doesn't mean that it's not in itself will not be a red flag, but the way we engage on the issue could be one. Using 55-45, it can be a much bigger difference. Obviously, it's a bigger problem. So it's and I'm always surprised that we sometimes we co-investing with other investors, and it seems like none of these questions really come up, and maybe we're missing something. I don't know. It's just to me, this is what it's all about to invest at this stage. It's really, if you're comfortable that you're investing in a team that's obviously smart, has the right expertise, is really showing all the right signals, but also has good foundations, on the people level, then you're in good shape. If on top of that they're working on an exciting market opportunity, obviously even better. It's working. You actually end up spending more time on that than estimating your target addressable market. At this stage, less crucial. You might speak to other investors who tell you, it's all about, investing in people who go for the biggest outcome possible, and 9 out of 10 will fail, but the one that will make it will make a huge return. It's a slightly different approach. We're more trying to, every investment that we make, we try and make sure that we've eliminated all these red flags, and we're investing in sound teams that have a chance to make it. And maybe they're not working on biggest thing. Maybe it's, it has the potential to be a 10, 50, 20 million exit. And that could be a fantastic outcome for everyone.
Well, I think it makes sense because, like we said, we're in a stage of maturity now, and we have the founder tech and the investor tech available to make this more of a reality as a way of investing, compared to that sort of slightly more roulette wheel approach. I think it's just, there's no excuse to still be working in that way and investing in that way in this day and age. The game has changed. And also, you factor on top of that, just the sheer volume of startups now. I don't think it's tenable either. Like, it's a zero-sum game. Like, to be able to evaluate that many, previously it might have worked because there were very few, and there were very few coming out of very few places, right? Yeah. Where especially, if early days, if we're thinking, predominantly out of Silicon Valley, they are a very specific profile that, the chances of success are, that much higher, and things like that. There's, if you're still approaching it from the same position sometimes, which some, investors do, some funds do, and you're trying to apply that to the modern equivalent of this, what the landscape looks like. It's just, it feels like a very risky play to me. And we've seen that bear out. I mean, we've seen funds collapse because of that. And not survive some of the challenges that have happened over the last sort of 5 to 10 years too. So I think it does need to change. And I just don't see that there's a reasonable excuse to still be approaching it in that way. And I don't think it's overall very fair to founders, and the ecosystem at large. It creates an environment which, everything's interconnected. So it does has an effect on things as a whole, and makes it just more difficult. So I applaud you guys for taking that more data-driven strategic approach. It's never going to be perfect, but at least you're trying to do something about it, which is, you have to applaud at the end of the day. I'm curious to know about reputation as well. Like, how important is reputation to you? Because I suppose one of the issues you have, and I hear from a lot of investors, is when it comes to, especially just this idea on its own of the two things, process and feedback. So you have that process, which you've alluded to, but then you've also got the end result where, founders will inevitably ask for feedback, or you give feedback as to why you didn't invest or why you did, etc. And overall, there's this thing that kind of sits on top of that, which is your reputation as a fund. How important is that to you? Because obviously I speak, in rooms full of people, even last night, I'm speaking to people about Hatch, about SFC, about, various different funds, VCs, angels, and people talk. So how aware are you of that for SFC, and how plugged in, and how concerned are you with that in the way that you conduct yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I think we want to be known as being active. I think at the end of the day, that's what founders care about the most. It's great to appear to be supportive, to give great feedback, and etc., and to be, these things. But first and foremost, people want to know, okay, are you likely to write a check if you're in? And at what rate do you do that? And what sectors do you do that? And are you potentially a fit for me? So I think that's the main thing is when it comes to reputation is for founders to have awareness of you is the main goal. In terms of getting feedback, of course, it's very important, and you can massively improve that over time. I think we're doing a better job than we used to. You get 2,000 applications per year, typically, of like us. So there's going to be a majority of companies that don't even make it to the next stage, obviously, and those get quite minimal feedback, I'll be honest. If we ask you to go through the process where you've put in time and effort into responding to questions and etc., we'll always want to be upfront about the reasons we don't proceed if that ends up the case. Quite often, actually, the process is a lot about trying to work with you around the issues that we've identified to the maximum degree. So if we end up not investing, you should know why. It should be quite clear, basically, that we couldn't resolve that particular issue. So yeah, it is important. I think you're in a position where you say no a lot of the time, so that will obviously frustrate and create frustration. And how you say no can create frustration as well. So you have to be mindful of that. But first and foremost, I think as long as you're known for, number one, being active, number two, once you've invested, to be supportive and not obstructive. I think those are the main goals. And then you hope that people recognize that. We've got quite a large portfolio, so we've got founders putting good words for us, and I'm sure there's still some more less positive things being said about us.
Well, on that note, let's address that directly, right? So I'm not. This isn't specifically about SFC, but as I was saying, last night I was at an event, and I won't say who and reveal any information, but there was a founder there who I know and I've known for a long time, who's now successfully raised their second round. And in their first round, they had an SEIS fund, not yours. Don't worry. I'm not just saying that it wasn't yours. And I asked, because obviously we're going through that process now, and she was like, terrible, just awful. And I was like, okay, well, what do you mean? Expand on that. And she was like, well, it's the initial term sheet. We felt like we were kind of. We had no choice. We had to go for it. But now it's proving to be quite restrictive. And early on they promised us a ton of support, and they just couldn't care less. And this is something that I do hear quite a lot of. Not maybe to that extreme, but there are murmurs of that. A bit of a reputation, I think, for SEIS funds in general. Of that, where do you think that comes from? Is it accurate? Is it maybe a misunderstanding of the process? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I can see where that's coming from. I think an SES fund, in my opinion, should be quite honest with founders and their investors, actually. We are quite, by definition, high volume investors. We are not necessarily going to be we are going to be as supportive as possible. And as I said, the main thing you want is, once you've invested, not to be obstructive. But once you're invested, you actually have a position that's more like to an accelerator, for example, than your VC, who's going to take an active role on the board, who's going to be expected to open doors to clients, and etc. We are more, I think what I want founders to say is that I've engaged with SFC. They said yes, they said no, but the process was quick. It was very clear throughout. If they've invested.
Raising investment is painful enough without getting bogged down in legal costs. That's why I'm using Founder Catalyst, today's sponsor for Peer, my startup's pre-seed raise. We've been lucky enough to have Sam, the CEO of Founder Catalyst, on the show before. Go and check out that episode. Their funding round service offers the most cost-effective way to produce funding round legals in the UK. It's just £1,495 excluding VAT, with no monthly fees or hidden extras, no matter how much you're raising. One Founder Catalyst customer recently raised 2.7 million and saved around £10,000 compared to the next option. If you're looking for SEIS, EIS Advanced Assurance, they've got a 100% success rate over the last 3 years. Founder Catalyst is built by founders for founders, and from my own experience, I can't recommend them enough. You can scan the QR code on the screen around here somewhere or around there somewhere, I don't know, or use the link in the description for 5% off. Thank you to Founder Catalyst for sponsoring this episode. Now back to it.
They've been supportive in the sense that maybe they haven't opened doors to 15 clients, but whenever I needed them to make a decision, to approve something, they were always quick to do it. They were always responsive. They didn't have in their terms anything that prevented me from hiring, raising, do all the things I need to do as a founder. I think we've been guilty in the past as well to think that because you're a fund, you need to be really involved in a lot of decisions that the businesses you invest in. Because it's, you're investing money, you feel responsibility to your investors to make sure the money is spent in a certain way, that every decision goes through you. And that's, I think, a mistake, because that's not recognizing that, you've met a bet on people and team. Yes, you need to have certain oversights of the key major decisions, but one, you need to be extremely quick at responding to that, because startups don't have time. Your position quite quickly will become less relevant. You want that. You want the company to grow and, probably raise more money, and you to be diluted as the early shareholder, and you not to matter so much anymore. So you have to recognize that and be okay with it, and see that as, the company maturing. This is absolutely fine. It's taken us a while to come to this realization. So I think we were guilty probably to be sometimes trying to control certain decisions, prevent certain things, maybe even sometimes asking too many questions. We do that because we feel we have a responsibility, and it's our job to our investors to do. But you always have to balance that with what a startup, the pace a startup needs to move at. The fact that the founders still need to have free reins to, we've met a bet on these people, as we've talked about. We spend a lot of time making sure we like the team. We trust the team. We give them money. Doesn't make sense then to try and control every decision they make. It's not good.
Every organization learns and grows, and it sounds like yours has done the same as would be expected in any other situation, by the sounds of it.
Yes. Yeah. These situations can come about as well when there's, it's really important that founders keep communications open throughout. It's very easy to miss, reporting cycle, for example. It's really, really important that you keep your investors, your shareholders engaged. Send regular updates. It's still surprising how few founders, and I get it, you're building the company, maybe you haven't had a good month. Maybe it's been, a shitty month. It's not great to write an update. It's not been a great month, but do it anyway, because when there's a lack of communication, this is typically when these issues occur. Right? Because then, 2 months down the line, you're going to need to send some legal paperwork, and you're going to have a much colder response. And if this comes out of the blue, and investors feel like they haven't been in the loop. So it's really, really important. I think founders can really prevent those issues by communication. There's never any downside. Communicate the bad stuff, not just the good stuff. It will always come back in a positive way if you do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's I would say a number one golden rule that with the startups I work with that applies across the board entirely, which is communication, right? Whether it's to stakeholders like investors, internally, everything. I mean, to the extent where I say over communicate, because it's better to have the problem of over communication early on, and then a bit like you were saying about websites and stuff where there's just too much information. It's like, it's easier to have too much and then refine it later than not enough. That's not a good starting point for anyone.
Yes.
So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, I get it. You're the founder, you've got a million things to do. Why should I send an email to those guys who invested, a year and a half ago, probably won't invest more, got other problems. But actually, if you need their approval or you need their input at some point in the future, really, really important that you keep them involved. They're shareholders in the company, they're owners of the company, so they have a right to know what's going on. If it's only negative stuff, it's fine. Come on, we should know. If we're surprised, then we're not doing our job right. This is expected that things will go wrong.
Yeah, it's interesting. You just mentioned something there that's made me think. I mean, maybe part of the reason why this is just speculation on my part, but maybe some of the reason why SEIS funds have developed something. I mean, it's not a huge reputation. I don't think. I think broadly the reputation is good, and especially right now, I think there's kind of we're entering a bit of a golden era actually for SEIS funds, but there is a slight reputation, like we said, of this, and part of it maybe is because, which you kind of alluded to, that there's a comparison happening between SEIS funds and VCs. And like you said, maybe that even you guys were doing that yourselves in the early days, because there's nothing else really to compare it to in the beginning, because it's quite a new thing. And so maybe you're sort of thinking, okay, that's what we're expected to do, so we should do it. And then likewise, founders, that's what we expect them to do, and they're not doing it. And so that's maybe where that's come. So it's the growing pains, perhaps, of just this relatively new kid on the block of the SEIS fund finding its footing, both in the zeitgeist of the founders' sort of vision of it, as well as for you guys personally. But then you also mentioned something that's made me think about this too, which was this idea of not being likely to invest again. Like, is this because of the very structure of SEIS funds in general, and the way that scheme works, that it just makes it it's restrictive in that sense to be able to do any sort of follow-on or initial fund round investing, or is it more of a just a personal choice?
I mean, it's just a reflection of that stage of investment. You invest, as I mentioned in the beginning, we do 100 investments per year. So we invest in 70 to 80 new companies per year.
Right.
All these companies are going to try and raise another round a year, 18 months later, literally next, all of them. We are not going to invest in all of them. So there's a lot of companies where we're going to say no, and that's because we don't have the capacity to say no, because even if we had the capacity, we probably wouldn't do it, because things are not working out in the way that we hope. I mentioned our scoring system for an initial investment. We have a separate scoring system for the follow-on investment.
And I imagine that's even tighter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You look at different things. So you're starting to look more about, obviously, you set certain milestones on the first one. You look at those milestones. In many ways, it's easier.
Right.
And you also look at, quite importantly, you look at the attitude, the way the business is run, the way the communication has flown, etc. And so that goes into quite a bit of the score. It's not possible. It's not desirable for an SES fund that's doing the first round investment to reinvest in the majority of the companies they invested the first time, because by definition, startups are not developing the way that was first hoped. That's absolutely fine and expected. So,
well, and just practically speaking, there's only a certain amount of money, right? So then, if you were to do that and get too distracted by that the secondary opportunities, then you would just miss out on all the new potential opportunities. And
exactly, and it's really important that just because you invested the first time, you don't feel bound to invest on the second round. Actually, a key criteria for us to follow on is that you have new investors coming in and providing the majority of the round, because we never want to appear as if we are throwing good money after bad. Which is a pleasant way of saying that you're reinvesting in a company just because you've made that first investment and the company is struggling a little bit, and we don't want the company to go down, and so we're putting new investors' money into it. But those investors don't want us to invest in that company. They want us to invest in the company that's flying and that's raising a round from and that's got an offer from another new investor. So that's the follow-on that you want to do. So I think there's obviously there can be frustration, because from the founder's perspective, it's not so obvious, right? You've got a fund on your cap table, you're struggling, you're low on cash. Of course, you're going to want the fund to invest again. It's completely natural, completely get it. But that's and that can create frustration if the outcome is a no. But on our side, there's the limited amount of follow-on capital we have, and we have to be really, really, really careful how we deploy that. It's that responsibility to our investors to make sure that it only goes to those companies that are performing the best way, and it certainly should not go to a company just for the simple reason that we invested the first time. That should not be a reason for us to reinvest.
And I imagine even if they are performing really well, you still have to sometimes make tough decisions, because, like you say, the priority is also about new deal flow, new opportunities. So that, I suppose, isn't always even a prerequisite to follow on investment, right?
Actually, we only invest for our follow-on fund is only invested in our existing portfolio companies. So that's That's the base of it. But then the way we select those companies is quite intentional. And one of the criteria is that the company has a new lead investor.
So it's like a separate fund essentially for that.
It is, exactly.
Right.
And the money is coming from a new set of, they're not the same investors.
I see.
This is why, exactly you said, we're not a VC fund. And I think it's really important that SCS and ES funds communicate in a different way. So it goes back to your question, why do we present ourselves as the leading SCS fund as our main tagline? Because it's really important, I think, that we draw a distinction. We are functioning in a completely different way with a completely different timeline than a VC fund. It has disadvantages. For example, we don't have a specific follow-on reserve allocated to every deal that we do. That's true. But the advantage is we work on a completely different timeline. We can invest at a much, much earlier stage. I mean, VC funds invest at, compared to us, it feels like they invest at the time when everything is
just before IPO.
Everything is, yeah, exactly. Sometimes it feels a bit like that, even though they call themselves early stage. So let's recognize the luck we have in the UK. We have this whole industry of funds able to deploy money at such an early stage. This is really unusual. In Europe, you don't really have that. You have business angels and you have a lot of public money. Honestly, it's not the same thing. So we're quite lucky to have these funds operating at this stage. So and with a completely different timeline, because for us to wait 15 years for an exit is absolutely in the cards, absolutely possible. We don't have a fixed life cycle. We're not bound to return money in 10 years. So it's really important for us to understand the distinction between the two. That there are huge positives, but there are also things that work differently than what you read on LinkedIn, the way VCs present themselves, etc. It's quite different. And it's confusing. How can you expect people to?
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
Well, and this is, look, this is why I think it's great that we're able to talk and put this out there, because, I've always been transparent. I think I even was with you when we first spoke, and I am with every guest when we initially speak before turning the camera on, which is that my motivation for this show is purely selfish. Right? I do it because I want to speak with interesting people and I want to learn. And it just so happens that by recording it and putting it online, other people, it turns out, with a similar kind of mindset, get a huge amount out of it too. And I do think it's awesome to have you on to represent SFC in the way that you are, and to talk about some of these things that aren't commonly known. And I assume probably you guys don't have the opportunity to talk about that much either, right? Which is to demystify this, to shed some light on it, and to talk about these things and where you operate in the behind the scenes, so that we can work towards educating and informing the general public, the founder sphere, as it were, on this, so that maybe when they come to you and they approach you, there's a bit more of that understanding, and we can kind of live a bit more harmoniously, I guess.
Yes. And look, as I say, in the UK, we have this very unusual kind of market structure. There's no equivalent really elsewhere. So there isn't actually that much content out there that's talking about that. And so it's perfectly, completely understandable that people have, that people get confused, founders get confused or investors get confused by certain things. Because, it's quite specific. It's very specific to the UK, and it doesn't exist in the same way elsewhere.
Yeah.
So, the more content we can put out there that, talks about it. And I think founders talking to each other is great. Complaining at an event is brilliant. You and I have a chat, and we, you raise that complaint, and we can talk about it. And then,
well, the thing is, I just know instinctively. Two different perspectives
doesn't mean that I'm right and the other is wrong.
Well, no, but I just know instinctively, being alive for for the small amount of time that I have on this earth, that there's always more to it, right? Than nothing's ever black and white. There's always more. There's a lot more grey than anything. So that's why I was interested in that, and I've been really broadly interested in SEIS funds as a whole. It's relatively new phenomenon, and especially SFC, because you're so prominent in the space, as the leader in this space. There must be more. There must be more to this, and of course there is. There always is. So that's why I wanted to one of the reasons why I want to speak, apart from being an awesome guy and having a cool story and all that. Like that's one of the things I wanted to try and tap into here, is to understand that a bit more. Because I don't just hear bad stories too, right? I'm just using that as I also hear great stories. I know founders that have received funds from you guys, and they can't speak highly enough of you as well. More of that than any negative. And just to remind, this wasn't someone talking about you anyway. It was a different fund. But no, so I just think
the same things are said about us, of course. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm sure they are.
I don't blame people for, it is, it is not what you read if you go on Medium and you look at, VCs describe themselves in their work, So,
exactly.
So
you don't know what you don't know at the end of the day, which is why I love doing this show. It sheds some lights on some things, and that's been really cool and interesting. Well, look, we're coming towards the end, unfortunately. It's amazing how quickly this time flies by, and I've still got a million questions, but I'm going to have to reserve them for another time. We get to do another episode, or maybe if we bump into each other in real life, maybe I can bug you with a ton more if you're not sick of me by then. But before we go, if you indulge me with my kind of something I'm trying to remember to do every episode this season, is to kind of put my guests, the spotlight on them, and put pressure on them to tell me what is something within this ecosystem, within this space, within this industry that should be talked about that isn't being talked about enough.
I think generally, I wish there was a bit more honesty from founders and investors alike on, the reality of the numbers, the reality of the behind the scenes of building a company and investing in startups, what the numbers really look like. I constantly go on LinkedIn and see press announcements. We are guilty of it as well, where numbers are massively exaggerated. You only read about, those companies raising their new rounds, and a year or two later, you don't care about. Let's be more honest about, how difficult this is, and let's talk more about things go wrong than we do. I think there's always this almost mad positivity in the startup world. That's not at all in line with how scrappy and how hard and how messy this actually is. So, there's many things, I think, where we could be a lot more transparent and honest about. And I think we have to play our part in that as well. So this may be more of a general point than one specific issue.
So last week's guest, by the time this airs, Yuru, of the founder of Hey, Food is Ready, a lovely lady. We had a great conversation. I asked her the same question, same answer. And it's funny. It comes up a lot. I think probably from experience, isn't it, that you kind of go into it with slightly rose-tinted glasses, and then as you go through it, like, wait a minute, why does no one talk about this? And so it is a topic that I'm hearing more and more people talk about. And it's interesting, since recording that episode with Yuru, I've taken the decision to actually take that on board and try and do something about it myself as a founder, and start to be a bit more sort of raw and open and honest about the losses just as much as the wins. I mean, in general, I'm not that vocal at all, and I need to improve that. But this is something that I want to bear in mind. I think there's a lot of learning that can come out of it. But you do have to be careful too. Like I was saying to Yuri, you have to be careful because there is a game to be played, and you don't want to knock potential customer confidence, potential investor confidence in what you're doing by being too vulnerable and being too vocal about your failures as well. So it is a bit of a it's a bit of a game.
Well, actually, when that sort of content actually does quite well usually when it comes out. So I think we've got startup magazines that do a great job promoting, pushing press releases and new rounds, to TechCrunch, etc. And I think there should be more content around, things go. There's also a lot of content about things going spectacularly wrong, right? And that's always quite fun to read, of course. But the more, I guess maybe it's not more boring actually. The more day to day, but it doesn't have to be boring, I think. But for example, I think we played with the idea at some point at SFC to have a series on failures actually, and invite people to talk about their failures. But we haven't done it because exactly as you say, you feel like you don't necessarily want to be associated too much with the negative stories. And
so I've had that idea for the show, actually a spin-off kind of show that I do want to do at some point. It's probably going to be later in the year, maybe quite later in the year, given everything else we've got going on. But it's going to be called Startup Nightmares or something like that. I haven't decided yet.
Yeah.
And the idea is that the founders will be entirely anonymized, because a lot of the issue as well is that people I speak to, they say, "Look, I'm under NDA, I can't talk about it," or whatever. There's other things too, like especially when it comes to exits and investors and all or ex-employees, all kinds of stuff. So the idea would be to completely anonymize the founders during that interview and just create some short form content basically that shares these nightmare scenarios, these horror stories, basically startup horror stories, to shed some light on it. And they could be very small. They could be like, I made this hire and this is the story of how it went wrong and set us back like 6 months or something. Like, could be that.
That'd be very good. That'd be very good. Look, like I always said, there is not much to learn from the successes, honestly. We talked about on Fido, Cognizant. Usually these are companies that, they've done so well because it was the absence of things going really. It was not linear by any means, but it was the absence of things going extremely wrong. That's my only explanation for their success.
Right.
So actually, it's much more interesting to look at things failing because you learn more, you learn lessons you can apply. You don't really learn so much from a company that just has had that, that hasn't faced those, deadly consequences, deadly events. So, fully support that concept of getting people to talk more about those challenges.
Which is so interesting because this is one of the reasons why I'm known amongst the startup crowd as the no bullshit advisor, because one thing that I talk about a lot of is there are so many books and manuals and handbooks and stuff like that written by very successful people that want to try and sell you courses and things like that on how to build a successful business. And to your point, the issue there is, well, the chances are that because they've been so successful, yes, they would have had failures. Yes, they would talk about their setbacks and so on. But actually, the people you really want to learn from are the ones that did it and didn't actually entirely manage to break out of it, like didn't actually manage to sell their business, or maybe they got close, but like for whatever reason, like I'm sure you can learn stuff from both, but it's almost by default that the ones that are most vocal and prominently publicly available are actually the ones that are probably going to have the least amount of overall practical advice to give you, right? Because they're in that position. And also, I think there's kind of a short-term memory issue there too, right? Because once you're at that point of success, you're so distantly removed from all of the struggles that you went through, and you're now in that position of success that you're less likely to really remember those instances where you learned the most, because you're just going to see that your successes, well, it's because I worked hard. Like, that's why, you know what I mean? Like, there's this kind of disconnect between the reality of why you actually made it versus why you didn't, and so on. So it's a minefield. It's a minefield. Well, I'm going to try and be more vocal about that sort of stuff. That's my goal, but it's hard. It's hard to find the time, but I'm going to try and make the time. But listen, man,
that's a great mission.
Yeah, exactly. We've all got to help each other out, right? So that's what I believe in personally. But listen, man, I've taken up enough of your time already, and we've gone slightly over, so I really, really appreciate it. I'll put your LinkedIn and obviously the SFC, website and everything like that down in the description below, so people can check you out, connect with you if that's okay. I mean, unless you don't want.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For sure.
Awesome. So prepared to get bombarded with all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Anywhere else? Anything else you want me to shout out or put in the description to direct people to?
No, our website has all the info. Hopefully, if you're a startup raising your first funding round, do think of SFC as your first port of call. We review everything, I promise. Every single application is reviewed by the team. So,
equally, I assume those that are interested in also maybe investing, diversifying the portfolio, investment portfolio, maybe looking at venture as an asset class for the first time, etc. SEIS is a great way to do that.
Yes, exactly. Your words, because I'm tied on financial promotion rules, so I'm not saying too much. But again, all the info is on the website, and the fund is always open throughout the year. So
of course,
for people who are interested.
Yeah. All right, brilliant. Well, listen, thank you again so much. I really appreciate you being so generous with your time and your words and your wisdom. So awesome. Really, really great to have you on. And everyone go and check out SFC, check out Joseph, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
was great fun. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening and or watching. Please like and subscribe, or if you are listening via podcasting service and want to show your support, consider rating or leaving a review. It really helps. See you next week.